Welcome to another edition of the Giants Huddle Podcast, brought to you by PSEG, energy efficiency for game time and anytime. Visit pseg.com/Giants for discounts, rebates, and home energy assessments. We do our offensive line draft preview every year. And to do it with us this year, as always, is the one and only Shaun O'Hara. This is a two-part podcast. We have Shaun first, then we're going to have Brandon Thorn, who does the excellent Trench Warfare blog, which is basically in Substack, which is basically just all offensive line play. He does a great job, and we'll dig into prospects with him. But we're going to start here with Mr. O'Hara. Shaun, top of the morning to you, brother.
John, top of the morning to you as well. Woke up at a three-point stance, knowing I was going to talk about the O-linemen. I love watching all these young guys as we project them, where they're going, when they're going. And it's always fun to kind of get to know kind of the new up-and-coming stars of the league.
All right, let's start here. Before we get into the draft class, the Giants, do you think center's a need? Because Joe Schoen has spoken very confidently. Some fans have complained overconfidently about what the Giants have in-house in terms of, center prospects, whether it's Shane Lemieux, whether it's Jack Anderson, whether it's Ben Bredesen. Do you feel confident if one of those three guys had to be the starting center in week one, or do you think they're going to add someone in the draft that will have a good chance to compete for that starting spot in week one?
Yeah, I don't believe it. I mean, we're in the pre-draft, looking at college prospects coming out and who's going to draft who. So I call this is all also the lying season. So you kind of have to take everything with a little grain of salt when you hear that stuff. Every GM is going to say, hey, look, we like where we're at right now, because they don't want to show their cards. They don't want to show their hand. But if you look at the Giants right now, they don't have a true starting center on the roster. With Feliciano gone and with Nick Gates signing down in Washington, you don't have a true starter. Sure, Shane Lemieux could slide over and play center. Sure, Jack Anderson could as well. That's like, hey, week 3, we got an injury. Week 4, we got an injury. We've got to, put some crazy glue on this thing for a week or two until our starter comes back. Absolutely, Shane Lemieux can play center in a pinch, but I don't know that that's necessarily the move that you want to make as before you even go into the season. Now, this year's draft, there is a plethora of really good quality centers. So I think for the Giants, it's all right. You don't ever want to reach, overreach for a guy because you have a need. But if one of these centers happens to fall and is available in the second or third or fourth round, I think it's absolutely a great pickup, and it checks a box in an area of certain need. Giants don't have a starting center right now. There are a multiple number of centers that can come in and can play week 1 and can be ready to rock and roll. So I think that is it's a great position to be in if you're the Giants. It's a luxury, but with Shane Lemieux and with Jack Anderson, I think Shane is a really good left guard. He played left guard his entire career at Oregon. So I know I have experience. I went from guard to center. So unless Shane Lemieux was knocking on Joe Shane's door every single day saying, I want to be the center, I want to be the center, draft a guard, I don't know that's where Joe feels comfortable. I will also say Shane Lemieux has been hurt every year. So it's kind of like, hey, until you prove to us that you can be healthy and you can be available all season long, we can't count on you to be the starting center right now.
Yeah, 100%. I get where you're coming from there, Shaun, and we'll dig into those prospects in a second. But first, what makes a good center? When I'm sitting here on my computer watching tape of centers, fans are at home watching video of centers, and they're trying to figure out, all right, I'm watching this guy in college. What are the important things I should pay attention to try to figure out if this guy's going to be a good center in the pros?
Yeah, great question. I think physically, the first thing that I look at with centers is their hands, because center is even closer combat than guards and tackles. Like guards and tackles, you have to take 1, maybe even 2 steps before you make contact. As a center, I mean, the guy is right here in your face. Like, what he had for breakfast. Like, he's that close. You could smell it. And I think for your hands are so crucial. So anytime I'm watching film, I want to see, all right, right out of the gate, what kind of footwork does the center have? What is his initial footwork? Are his hips loose enough that he can open up and he can reach? Is he doing a false step? And then what are his hands doing? Because the one thing that I kind of learned just as I morphed into the center position was I can move before anybody else. So are you using that as an advantage? And my left hand, I would move my left hand as I was snapping the ball, because that was how I could initiate contact. Like Bruce Lee said, the first meaningful contact in a battle always wins. So that was a key. So I'm always looking at the center's hands. Where are they? Are they wide? Are they slow? Are they coming from underneath? Do they have a little punch to them? Do they have some power? That's a big thing technique wise, but take the physical aspect outside of it. What makes a good center? Communication. The biggest thing other than the physical attributes of a center is, can you communicate with your fellow offensive linemen? Can you get everybody cohesively working together and knowing exactly what to do? And can you also communicate with your quarterback? So you've got to have that synergy, and you've got to have that ability to, okay, am I seeing the same thing my quarterback is? Here's the issue. Here's the problem. We have to redirect. I think it's even more challenging now than it was 20 years ago offensively, because you will call 2 plays, maybe 3 plays in the huddle. And as you come to the line, you have to decipher what's in front of you, what's happening. And defenses are constantly changing, and they're moving a lot more now. You're seeing variable fronts. Used to be, John, hey, if you were playing the Pittsburgh Steelers, it was a 3-4 defense all day long. If you're playing, you were playing the Rams, it was a 4-3 defense all day long, and that was their base front. Teams now are not really in their base defense as much now. Everybody's running, because everybody runs 3 wides, 11 personnel. You're seeing a lot more nickel defenses. You're seeing a lot more 4-down even looks, and then they will sprinkle in some odd fronts. So all of those things have kind of made it even more challenging now as offensive linemen, specifically centers, because you've got to decipher the code and figure it all out, and then regurgitate it to your guards and your tackles. And usually, and I say this is a term of endearment, the further you away from the ball you get, the dumber you get. So the center, you've got to be on point.
I make sure I'll tell David Deal you said that. When you see centers fail in the NFL, Shaun, what are the most common things that they can't get right in the league? Is it physical? Is it mental? Is it connecting with the coaches, with technique? When you see a center fail and never figured out, and we've seen that with some late first round centers even that have never figured it out. What do you think? Is there a common denominator, or is it really just, individual basis type thing?
Well, I think there's a number of reasons. Anytime you see young centers are going to struggle because, mentally sometimes they just feel like they can't keep up, and it takes a little while for that to slow down. But from a physical standpoint, as a center, you're usually getting some sort of help from your guards and your combo blocking. So I feel like your technique and your footwork, and like I mentioned, your hands are so paramount. So you've got to hone that craft, and the guys that can really do a good job with their hands. Look, I was an undersized center my entire career. So the smaller guys, they have to find a way. Tyler Lindenbaum comes to mind down in Baltimore. Like his first couple of weeks in the NFL, it was a different game, and he kind of struggled. And then he kind of figured out, all right, how do I get my hands inside? I used to watch film on Tom Nalen, and that was the biggest thing with him was, he never wore gloves, but his hands were always inside. And, of course, with Terrell Davis, they mastered that outside zone running scheme. So that's a big part of it. But I think, ultimately what happens with guys is you struggle in pass pro, and when defenses know that, you're not great in pass protection, they will single you up. They will put somebody on you. They will shade somebody on your shoulder, usually to your snap hand, making it tough, and they will try to expose you. And the way that they single you up is they go what we call 5 down. So the guards are covered, tackles are covered, and then now they have somebody on your shoulder. Now, if he's head up on you, that makes it easy. Now all of a sudden, because now you just can grab him, and he's not on the edge, you don't have to kind of move. So I think a lot of times, the centers that I've seen struggle in pass pro, not only do you get the guy on you, but now all of a sudden they start bringing twists up the middle and blitzers. So if you are struggling with change of direction, you're going to see a lot of blitz. You're going to see a lot of inside. We call them cross dogs, and that's basically where the linebackers will cross, or the linebacker will cross on the opposite A gap of the nose, and they will kind of knife and make it tough on you. A lot of times you end up having to pass that off with a running back. So that's really tough. But I think as a center, the thing that you really have to get good at is anticipation. You've got to see a front, and you have to anticipate this is what's going to happen. That something is different, something is happening, and I've got to get back, because from an alignment standpoint, the center is in front of the guards. Like if you look at the center, the 2 guards are kind of flanked, so you're already kind of out on an island. So you've got to kind of get some depth whenever you anticipate a stunt like that. I feel like, young centers can learn so much and they can grow with, from their first year to the second year and into the third year. You pretty much know by the second year if a guy's going to have a 10-year career or if he's, going to be done after 4.
Interesting. All right, before we get to the prospects, one more, because you mentioned a couple things there. One, they're going to try to single you up. Two, you played as an undersized center. Well, whoever the Giants center is going to be for the next 5-10 years is going to have to deal with Jordan Davis in Philadelphia and the other, slew of defensive tackle pass rushers they have there. Deron Payne just signed long-term in Washington. Jonathan Allen's long-term in Washington. Dallas has the more stunts and crosses than you can count during these games. Is getting a center with a little bit more size, you think, important for the Giants, given the nature of the division and the opponents? Or do you think an undersized guy could survive in this division? And I ask that just because I watched Dexter Lawrence kill Bradbury last year. He was a good center, but he's small, right? So do you think you have to try to get somebody bigger, or do you think the right guy, even if he's a little smaller, could survive in the NFC East given the competition?
Yeah, it's a great question. I think from a jumping off point, it's okay. How do we beat the birds, right? Right now, everybody in the draft, the free agency is, all right, who won the division? The Eagles, all right? They represented the NFC in the Super Bowl. So we've got to beat them. How do we beat them? You have to protect the quarterback. So no doubt it's how do we block Fletcher Cox? You mentioned Jordan Davis. All right, how do we block these guys down in Washington? Dallas has got some unbelievable pass rushers as well. So you've got to protect the quarterback. You bring up the undersized center, and I'll give the example I'll give is Jason Kelce down in Philly. He's an undersized guy, but he's got great technique. He's got really good footwork. He's really strong, even though he's not this huge, massive guy. So, I kind of look at like Frank Ragnow in Detroit. He's kind of a bigger center. So it's, you can win with both. I think the thing with Kelce down in Philadelphia is he's got some stud guards. So you've got Landon Dickerson at left guard, who's a big, strong dude. At right guard, I think it was Sam Malu. Yep. So, who are you putting next to your center? If you have an athletic center, you better not have 2 athletic guards because now you don't have enough mass and you don't have that beef. So you can absolutely, win and build your roster and your team with an undersized athletic center. But again, if you're going to do that, then you got to maximize that center potential. All right, now he's able to get to the linebackers. He's able to get to the second level. You better run a lot of screens. You better run a lot of toss plays, a lot of perimeter plays. Get some gadgets going and let him get out in space where he can excel. That's Kelce has done a great job of that. And you see last year, it seemed like every single week he had a highlight block, whether it was on a screen play or a draw play or something, getting up to the second level, knocking a linebacker down. But I think ultimately, anytime you're trying to build an offensive line, if there's a bigger guy and a smaller guy, I think everybody's going to say, hey, if this big guy can move, you know what? I'm going to go give me the 6'5" guy over the guy that's 6'1".
Well, I guess I'll ask the follow-up then is how would you classify the Giants running attack? Because I thought they did a little bit of everything last year, to be honest with you. I wouldn't classify them as a gap scheme team. I wouldn't classify them as an outside zone team. I think depending on the week, and I think they change throughout the year too, what they like to run, Shaun. So how would you classify the Giants rushing attack when you're trying to find the right fit for the type of scheme that they run?
Yeah, I find the same way. I don't look at it and say, it's a fullback and tight end, bring everybody in the box. We're running power, old school football. Like I don't see it as that. A lot of times that, there was no fullback and it was 2 or 3 tight ends and they would run what we call duo, which is everybody just kind of having double teams. But, even with that, that's, it's more of a zone blocking kind of scheme, but with double teams. So it's not what we call a gap scheme. Gap scheme is when you are down blocking and you're creating a gap. You're down blocking.
And you're pulling,
you're pulling a guard and a fullback. So a gap scheme is you're trying to create a gap and you're attacking a gap on that defense, whereas zone is you're kind of getting the guys moving. So I thought the Giants actually, tried to do both. And I think sometimes the defense you're playing can dictate whether you're going to run more zone or get more gap scheme. I think the best offenses can do it all. And so you don't ever want to just kind of pigeonhole your offense, say this is the type of running game we're going to be. And you know what? Sometimes you're going to come up against a defense that, you're just hitting your head against the wall and you don't want to keep doing that. So you've got to have that flexibility. But I will say this. I've always felt like Saquon was a better running back from the home position. I've always felt like he was better at having the ability to press the hole and cut up, as opposed to being in shotgun. And, as I'm a former offensive lineman, so shotgun runs now I feel like are much more prevalent than they were 10 years ago. But it's a tough entry point, because if you're in a shotgun position and the running back is on one side of the quarterback and you hand the ball off, you have shrunk the field. Like now it's harder for him to press the whole front side. And so now he's automatically already looking for the cut back. And so it makes it really tough, because you basically hold the defense. You don't have to defend that front side of the field right now, because he's never going to get there, because he's on the back side of the quarterback. So I feel like those kind of runs can be tricky and can be tough. You need athletic guys, but you need a running back that can kind of see what the defense is doing pre-snap. So I felt like Saquon, from the home position, if you give him 6.5 to 7 yards to kind of read the defense and press the hole, I feel like that is where he's at his best. His power comes through. He can run through the arm tackles. And I feel like we saw a little bit more of that last year, him hitting the hole and just running through people.
All right, so let's dive into the class, Shaun. And based on what you said in your first answer, you don't see a surefire first-round type of talent at the position in this draft, huh? And you were, by the way, on the field with them at the Combine. You watched their Senior Bowl stuff. You watched their college tape. You don't see a Linderbaum, Creed Humphrey level player in this draft?
Look, it could happen, no doubt about it. I think Joe Tippmann is probably the best prospect when I look at all of the centers, and all right, what are they going to be like 2 or 3 years from now? So look, somebody could definitely take him, later on in the first round. I don't see somebody taking a center in the first 15 to 20 picks. Look, I think right now the premium is on the tackle position. And if you're going to draft an offensive lineman in the first round, it's probably going to be a tackle, or unless there's some guy that you just have a guard that you have rated through the roof. I think guys like Paris Johnson, I think Peter Skoronski will probably be the first tackle taken, the Northwestern tackle. He's done a great job. I think he's probably the most polished out of all the tackles coming out of the league, the most athletic, the most balanced. Paris Johnson from Ohio State is a very interesting guy. Played guard a lot. Last year was his first year at left tackle, so I feel like he's really athletic. He's a great kid. He's got great hands, great feet. He's just a little bit raw. He's a little bit green. He just needs more time and more reps. But those kind of guys, at that size and that athletic ability, it's tough to pass on a guy like that in the first round if you need a tackle. So luckily for the Giants, they don't necessarily need a tackle. So and certainly not in the first 3 rounds are they going to go that way. But I look at these centers, and there's a lot of these centers where, man, if they're sitting there in the second round or third round, I think that's extremely high value for some of these guys. So guys like Joe Tippmann, John Michael Schmidt from Minnesota, Luke Whippler from Ohio State. I even like Stromberg from Arkansas. I think he's kind of like the dark horse out of all these centers. But yeah, this year at the Combine, John, I don't think I've seen this many offensive linemen snapping to the coaches during this drill. So it was pretty cool to see that many centers invited to the Combine. I think there were 7 total centers there.
Yeah, I want to get to Stromberg and Juice Scruggs, some of the later centers, in a second. But you mentioned kind of those consensus top 3, which I think you tend to agree with: Whippler, Schmitz, and Tippmann. Separate them for me. What makes them different? How are they similar? And, what would you be looking for if you draft each one of those 3 guys?
Yeah, so let's start with Tippmann from Wisconsin. The first thing that you see from him, you turn on any game film from Wisconsin, and he's pulling like every 5th play. There he is, snapping the ball. He's getting out in front of the running play, and it's a perimeter play. Sometimes it's a weak side zone play, and the guard's down blocking. He's getting out in space. So he's very comfortable on the move, blocking on the move. I think, people look at his size. He's 6'5", 6'6". He's got great knee bend. The first thing I think of is, man, if you got a 6'6" center, this guy's going to get bull rushed all day long because he's so tall. They're going to be underneath him. Most nose guards are vertically challenged, and as low man wins. So the first thing that I look at is, do they have good knee bend? He does. He's got really good flexibility, really good knee bend, strong lower legs. So I think that's a feather in his cap. I thought he did a great job. Combo blocks up to the second level. Never lost any power. Great momentum. I think he can make all of the blocks. He's really good at reach blocking. So I think that for Tippmann, he's I think he's the cream of the crop when it comes to this center group. Could somebody take him in the first round? Absolutely, if somebody falls in love with him. But if you get a guy like him in the second round, he's a plug and play starter. Week one, he's starting. He's gonna be your guy, and I think he's one of those guys that can morph into a Pro Bowl type of player. Just kind of physically, there are some characteristics that I see in him that are very similar to Frank Ragnow, the center for the Detroit Lions. And he's a big, tall center, physical guy. And the Giants played the Lions last year, and they were one of the more physical teams in the league last year. So I think he can fit that.
How about John Michael Schmitz and Whippler?
Yeah, John Michael Schmidt. I like watching him. He's a Minnesota Gopher. I think when you look at his game, he is a smash mouth kind of guy, and he's got a great finish to him. I think he's got the right amount of nastiness. Like, he's not going to cost you anything. He's not going to create penalties. He's not overboard. We've seen that from some guys that kind of take that to the extreme. But he's a finisher. He plays through the whistle. He likes putting guys down on the ground, and he likes finishing blocks, and he likes pancakes, clearly. He's a much more in-line blocker. You're not going to see him pulling out on perimeters. He doesn't have that same athletic ability that Tippmann does. I think in the combo blocks, the thing that I just wanted to see a little bit more was a little bit more leg drive, a little more acceleration as he bounced up to the second level. But I think he's a very good center. I think he's going to continue to get better. He's bigger, he's thicker, he's got a very thick lower body. And, if mass is your thing and you want a big, thick center, that's the guy that you want. So
I saw him run a lot of outside zone, make a lot of nice reach blocks on the tape from Minnesota too.
Yeah, I mean, as much as I say he's an inline blocker, like, he can reach. He can absolutely, reach, outside zones. He's got pretty good lateral capability. I think, there's things that you show up on tape, you say, okay, you know what, those are things that he can correct and he can get better at, he can improve on. But he's got all the skills, all the intangibles. I think he's got great demeanor. Just talking to some people, the interviews at the combine and talking with this kid, he's one of those kids that, like, you're never going to worry about your phone ringing at 2 a.m. with John Michael Schmidt.
All right, how about Whippler, Jersey guy?
Yeah, Jersey boy. I really like Whippler. He's kind of flew under the radar with some of all the talent around him at Ohio State. Not the biggest guy. Like, he's not going to wow you with anything, any numbers, verticals, or any of the combine measurements. But when you turn on the film of all the centers in this draft, I feel like he's the most polished. Like, he fits the part. He's got great hands. All of his footwork in combo blocks, reach blocks. He's got really great footwork. He's always balanced. I mean, I don't see him on the ground. Like, one of the things that I always put down as in red ink whenever I'm watching film and taking notes is how many times a guy's on the ground. And as offensive lineman, if you're on the ground, like, you can't win. You're not helping your team. You can't block people if you're flopping around. So for Luke Whippler, he can do it all. I think he's great at the point of attack. He's great with the zone scheme blocking. Like Tippmann, he likes to get out in space. He likes to pull. So he's, you see him in screens, you see him in toss plays, working to get up to the second level on combo blocks. I think Whippler is a really good prospect coming out. I really like him. He's got a little personality too. So maybe that's the Jersey boy in him. But I think he could be one of the guys that we look back on in this draft a few years from now and say, boy, that guy, he didn't get enough publicity leading up to the draft. But I think by year 3, people are going to know who Luke Whippler is.
All right, those are probably the day 2 centers. You mentioned, Stromberg already from Arkansas as potential day 3 guy. I think you mentioned Juice Scruggs earlier as well. Who else would you like on day 3 if the Giants are still looking for a center? And just talk about those 2 guys that I mentioned.
Yeah, I think Stromberg, he's probably got the most amount of film out there, and just a lunch bucket guy, and probably not as much accolades as some of the other guys, but just tough, really good techniques. He's one of those guys that I think would really fit into the room with the Giants, and I think Bobby Johnson love to have a guy like that. He's just going to come in, he's going to go to work, he's going to put his head down. And he's got some feistiness to him as well. So I think that's a big part of that, the culture of that O-line room has changed significantly in just 1 year with Bobby Johnson running that group. So I think Stromberg's could be a good guy. Juice Scruggs, you mentioned. There's a couple of guys that played center in addition to it. I know Osiris Torrance is a guard, and he played a little center in the Senior Bowl. Steve Avila, Alon Ali from TCU, Alex Forsythe from Oregon. He's probably an even later round center.
Jarrett Patterson, another one of those combo guys, right?
Yeah, Patterson from Notre Dame. The interesting guy that I've kind of heard his name mentioned a couple different times is Cody Mock, who played tackle at North Dakota State, but he also played a little guard at some of the bowl games, the Senior Bowl, I believe. He moved in a guard, and I think he even took some center snaps. So he could play it all. I don't know if he's big enough to be a tackle in the league. So I could see a team looking at Cody Mock. If Cody Mock's sitting there in the third round, right? I mean, I'd be shocked if Cody Mock was available in the third round. But if he's sitting there and someone says, "Hey, look, like he's an offensive lineman, he's a player. We'll find a place. We'll find a way to get him on the field." He could be kind of a dark horse as, hey, maybe he wants to move to center in the league. I certainly did that. I played left tackle at Rutgers, moved to center. Like Nick Gates did the same thing. He was a tackle at college and then moved inside and played guard and center. So I think Cody Mock is a guy that Giants fans should keep their eye out on, because he could end up being a guy that the Giants pluck up if he's sitting around there.
Yeah, the Giants do need a guard, Shaun, and you mentioned some of them in your last answer. Any other guards that when you were at the Combine in Indy really jump out to you, where if the Giants are looking to kind of beef up that left guard spot? And look, Lewinsky, he's only got 2 years left on his contract. You got to, try to get some backup there. I know Josh Azudu's here, who's a young player they drafted last year, McKeithen too. But any guards that you really kind of saw at the Combine, you're like, oh, all right, I could love to see that guy in Big Blue.
Yeah, Osiris Torrance is the guy that jumps out at you. Just this kid's a total stud, and played 5 years, 4 years at Louisiana, and then transferred to Florida. Followed Billy Napier, the coach, and his O-line coach as well, to Florida. And it's funny, every year you get like all these stats from different people, like, hey, this offensive lineman only gave up 1 pressure or 1 sack in his senior year. Osiris Torrance did not give up a single sack in his entire college career. Like in 5 years of playing football, not 1 sack. That to me was remarkable. I don't know how you do that, but that really kind of jumps out at you. And then you watch him on film, and this dude, I mean, look, I think he was 400 pounds at one point in his life. So he's been big his whole life. Weight's not really an issue. He's been able to keep that off, but this dude has huge hands. Like he almost looks like one of the Marvel superheroes. And like when he punches guys, I mean, that's it. It's lockdown central, and he's got great, violent, physical hands. So as a guard, you love anytime somebody's got a big punch like that. And from a power standpoint, he can anchor with the best of them. I think he's got some nastiness to him. He kind of likes pounding guys. He likes pile driving guys, and I think that's what you want if you're going to get a right guard. I've always felt like when you look at offensive linemen, the right guard has to be the most physical guard. Left guard, you're asking to pull a lot more. They can be a little more athletic, but your right guard, typically teams run their power football. They run their strength to the right. So you've got to have a powerful right guard. When I played, Chris Snee was one of the toughest SOBs out there. He was always one of the strongest guys on the field, certainly one of the strongest guys on our team. And that was always a big part of our running game, was we had our powerful right guard. No matter who was there, he was going to move them. That's what you get in a guy like Osiris Torrance. His nickname is Cybo. His mom named him Cyborg. So that gives you any insight into what kind of kid you're talking about. There's another guy that jumped out from a power standpoint, Emil Ekiyor from Alabama. Didn't give up a sack in his last 2 years at Alabama. And you think about the competition he was going against. Won a national championship in Alabama a couple of years ago. And it's funny because, he was at the Combine, and he's from Indianapolis. So it was like a home game for him. He grew up right around there. So he was in his glory. Interesting because we were talking earlier about, hey, maybe somebody that is a guard that can maybe move to center. He played center a little bit, and actually at the Senior Bowl stepped in a number of times in some one-on-ones and in some different drills and played center. And I tell you what, he's extremely stout. This guy's got some thick, powerful legs, and whether it was at center, or whether it was at guard, he was not going backwards. Like whether it was a one-on-one blocking play or pass blocking play, nobody was pushing him back. So he was a very stout guy. Kind of really jumped out at me. Um, the other guys, everybody kind of just Steve Avila from TCU is a guy that was highly decorated, has a ton of film out there. Really powerful guy. So again, another powerful guard. I think he played left guard at TCU, but I could see him, moving over to the right side as well.
Yeah, I think he played 4 different positions there at one point or another.
Yeah, I think he played center and moved out to guard his last year. So I think that he's a guy that a lot of people are really high on. But it's, when you look at those guards, it's, the best guards in this draft are all big boys. They're big, powerful guys.
All right. I'll real quick. You don't have to go too in depth on this. The Giants need a swing tackle, right? They have Neal and Andrew Thomas. They're pretty happy with that. Any tackles out there, maybe developmental guys that you saw at the combine where you're like, oh, you know what? This guy looks like he can move. Maybe he has to do some development, stuff like that. Some of the Giants could take on day 3 that maybe could be a developmental guy out there at tackle.
Yeah, I mean, I mentioned Cody Mock. He won't be there. Ryan Hayes from Michigan.
That's a good one.
Played at the Senior Bowl. I think he's a guy that could absolutely use another year to kind of develop and just get a little bit stronger. I thought there was times at the Senior Bowl where he just got out muscled, and he's a good player, plays hard, like does not take any plays off, but he could be a late round guy that you pick up. I think there's another guy down in Maryland, Jalen Duncan, who I really liked his athleticism. I think he's kind of under the radar because he played at Maryland and people weren't watching Maryland every single Saturday at 12 o'clock. But I think he's a guy that's got some really good footwork, some really good balance. He's got really good punch. So he could end up being a nice steal. There's a guy that we didn't really hit on, and I don't, not a lot of people are talking about but Matt Bergeron from Syracuse.
Good player.
Undersized tackle, not as big as some of these other guys that are coming out of Ohio State and Georgia, but a really sound, really good, polished tackle. He's got great hands. Every time I watched him in one-on-ones, at the Senior Bowl, his footwork, it was so natural. Like a lot of guys, you look at them and it's like they're laboring through their kick slide. His kick slide was very smooth, very natural, and his hands were always inside. So there was a couple times that guys bull rushed him, and he had a hard time anchoring with that, sitting down. But that happens in the NFL every single day. You go to watch an NFL practice like you and I do in training camp. The bull rush is kind of like, it's almost like an unwritten code. Like you don't do the bull rush in the one-on-one pass rush because it's not really fair. Like all you're doing is trying to drive the guy back. It's kind of like a jerk move. But I think Bergeron is a guy that can really surprise some people, and he would be a great late pickup if he's around.
Great.
See, I'm looking at my notes right now. There was another tackle that I kind of liked that. See if I could find him. So Darnell Wright is probably going to be pretty high. He's going to be probably a high draft pick. I don't think he'll be down there later on, but he was a guy that kind of flew under the radar. Dalton Wagner. We talked about Stromberg from Arkansas. Dalton Wagner, it was a 6-year guy, played a ton of football. He's got a great personality. He actually signed with the WWE. He had an NIL deal with the WWE, and it was for food, I think. And so offensive lineman, it was kind of like, hey, this is great.
That is the most offensive line thing I've heard in my entire life, Shaun. I can't get 100%. Over how offensive line that is.
Yeah. Hey, you don't need money. Just give me. Can I get like the gold pass to Outback? Can I get Applebee's gold card? So yeah, I think his NIL deal was for food, and he's got a little football in his blood. His cousin was Keith Lumpkin, who was an offensive lineman at Rutgers. So I think when you look at Dalton Wagner, he's a 6'8" kind of guy. So I don't love giving NFL comparisons because I don't like pigeonholing guys or saying that, but like he kind of reminded me of Mark Colombo. Mark Colombo was a really tall guy, 6'8". Look, he just like when you look at him, you're like, hey, he doesn't look super athletic, and you're like, and kind of, but but he's a good old lineman. Like he's just got really good technique. He's got really good footwork. He's strong, even though he doesn't look like he's this huge, powerful guy. Just got really good technique. He's a guy that I think. Man, if he's around there in the fifth, sixth, or seventh round, I think he would be a steal.
All right, final question, Shaun. Not offensive line, just general big picture Giants here. What would you like to see them walk away with their first 3 picks? If there's any, you can give me positions, you can pinpoint players at positions and spots, however you want to handle this. I leave the floor open to you. If you were and by the way, Shaun will be with us on our draft coverage later in the week. We should have fun with that. So give me, what are your hopes and dreams for the Giants as they kind of, walk out of round 1, 2, and 3 with, either positions or players that you would hope they could walk away with to improve their team this year and set themselves up for the future?
Yeah, John, looking forward to our draft coverage later on this week. And of course, at that point, we'll talk about how wrong I was with all of these answers I'm about to give you.
I've been wrong for a month and a half, Shaun. It's fine. Just get on the bandwagon. We're all in this together, man.
In the tail of the donkey, So, look, I think if you're a Giants fan right now, you're like everybody's saying, look, can we get a receiver? We just talked about interior O linemen. I think that those are positions that you want to strengthen the team. Certainly for offensive linemen, like they need some younger, some younger blood, some younger life, and you need some depth as well. So those are 2 areas of need. I think if the Giants can find a receiver in the first or second round, that look, I'm not everybody's caught up on size. There's a couple of tall receivers in this draft. The kid from TCU,
Quentin Johnston,
6'2", 6'3". Yeah, Quentin Johnson. He's a big kid. I think there's like one other kid. The kid from Tennessee is 6'2", 6'3". So
Tillman.
That's what everybody wants. Give me that big, tall number 1 receiver. Look, I don't care what the size of the receiver is that the Giants get. The word that I'm looking for is space, right? Can the receiver create space? Because last year, Daniel Jones, when you look at the offense and what he was able to do, there was not a lot of space that he was throwing the receivers to. Like they did not create a lot of space and a lot of separation. And you can do that with size, you can do it with speed. So I think that's one area. Look, if in the first 3 rounds, the Giants can get a receiver that can create some space and some separation, that's a plus. I think in the league right now, take the quarterback out of it. The premium positions are tackles. All right. Giants are good there on tackles. Corners. You can never have enough corners. Most teams play nickel defense more than any other base coverage. So you need 3 starting corners. I think the Giants need a corner. And then I don't think you can have enough pass rushers. So if the Giants got a receiver, a corner, and a pass rusher in the first 3 picks, I think that would be a really good move. And I would be fine if they went offensive lineman instead of a pass rusher or vice versa. But again, it all depends on what is the run, early on in the draft as opposed to what's available from a value standpoint. So you can never have too many pass rushers on 3rd down. It's always nice to be able to rotate guys in there. O-linemen hate that. You can never have too many starting corners. And I think for the Giants, absolutely help at receiver and depth along the interior offensive line is a must.
Yeah, you can see Shaun O'Hara and I on our coverage on Thursday night after the Giants make their first pick. We will react to that pick right on Giants.com and the Giants mobile app. Shaun, good stuff, my friend. I'll see you in a few days. Thank you.
Sounds good. Thanks, John. Looking forward to it.
All right, we thank Shaun O'Hara. Great job out of him talking and going inside that center class. And now for the back half of our offensive line draft preview, we're joined by Brandon Thorn. 2nd year he's joined us here. He's Trench Warfare podcast, Substack, newsletter. Brandon, did I miss anything else?
No, I don't think so. Established the run, but that's during the season. But yeah, that's pretty much it right now.
Yeah, and Brandon lives for tracking the offensive line stuff throughout the year. So great guy to have on. He takes a real deep look at these prospects. And, Brandon, I'm sure usually when you do a lot of these hits, you get a lot of questions about the tackle class and all that stuff. Well, the Giants, fortunately, have had a couple of high draft picks to tackle that at least Andrew Thomas has turned into a very good player. And Evan Neal had a rough first year, but they hoped he improves and kind of takes that step forward. I guess why don't we start here before we get into the draft class? Your thoughts on Evan Neal's first year and kind of where his next steps have to be for him to kind of develop into a top offensive lineman the same way Andrew Thomas did.
Yeah. Well, I mean, I think you kind of touched on it a little bit. I mean, it was very up and down. He had his moments. There was a couple games, especially I think later second half of the year. There were some games where he would string almost a whole game together. Of a lot of good reps. So you saw some of the progression. I think so much of what most of these young guys, him included, you saw with Andrew Thomas, it's so technique based. Because I mean, it's not like Andrew Thomas got any stronger, or more athletic, or anything like that. I mean, it's just learning. I think so much of it is in pass protection, especially getting to your landmarks, your set points, based on the different passing concepts, based on the depth of the quarterback, just the timing of the play, and then also factoring in who you're going against, what alignment they're in. That's going to dictate kind of where you need to be, when you need to be there. It's a process. Offensive line is such a skill-based position, much more so than defensive line or pretty much most positions, I think, just because it's so unnatural, kind of moving backwards and things like that in pass protection. So I think if he could play with better timing, get out of his stance more consistently, snap timing is huge, especially for tackles. You typically want, one of the things you look for tackles is you want those guys to be the first ones out of their stance, because they're dealing with so much space and a better athlete across from them, 9 times out of 10. So I think that it starts there with how he gets out of his stance. If he could get out of his stance quickly, pretty much every time or most of the time, that's going to just give him that extra half second to be in the right position, so he could kind of dictate terms to the pass rusher. Because if he plays on the pass rusher's terms, it's not going to go well. He's going to have to reach. He's going to have to lunge to try to make contact. He's going to get off balance, things like that. But if he could dictate terms at 6'7", 340, then I think he'll be all right. So you saw flashes of it. I think we saw a lot of it at Bama as well, of course, but. Yeah, I think it's a process, and he's young enough to where, I wouldn't be too concerned. He has a long runway to improve here. So,
yeah, I'm with you. I think kind of that lunging and getting out over his pads kind of messed up with his balance a lot on some of those reps you're talking about. And this would be the last tackle question I asked for you. Giants could use maybe a long-term swing tackle behind those two guys. They have Matt Parrott, who's been around for a while, a couple other guys. But and we were just talking before we started, day 3 offensive lineman. You kind of been doing some research on that. Who's maybe a day 3 tackle you could pick in this draft, Brandon, that you think could kind of develop into a swing tackle down the road?
There's a lot of them that I like. Depends on if they make it to day 3, though. Nick Saldiveri, Tyler Steen, Carter Warren. Those are probably my 3 favorite swing tackle guys who I have graded, anywhere from late 3rd round to 4th round. So, they could go anywhere in there. It's kind of a fringe, top 100 guys. So those are 3, right off the bat, I think that should be swing tackles right away. And if not, potentially win a job somewhere. A little bit further down the line, you're looking at guys like maybe Wanya Morris, Asim Richards, Jalen Duncan, potentially. Those are probably the next guys. I think Warren McClendon has a shot at being a swing tackle as well. That's the guy I have graded kind of closer to the 5th, 6th round, but there's some options down there, man. And I think the Giants would be a good spot for them to go to as well, because there's obviously no pressure to play, and they could truly be swing tackles there. And so, yeah, I think those names, if they're going to get one, those would be the 5 or so names that I would bet on.
Good names. All right, let's dive into the center class here, and this is more towards the top of the draft, Brandon. So why don't we start here? Do you think there's a 1st-round center in this draft, or do you think you should start thinking about it more in round 2? Your overall kind of 20,000-foot view of that class.
Yeah, I don't have a 1st-round center in this class. So yeah, 2nd round would be where I would go. And there's, my number 1 center is John Michael Schmitz. So I have a 2nd-round grade on him, kind of like middle of the 2nd. He could potentially go in the late 1st, though. I wouldn't be shocked at all. And then my number 2 center would probably be, it's kind of like a tie between Cody Mauch and Joe Tippmann, and either of those guys could play guard as well, but I would ideally like to see both those guys at center. But I think Tippmann has a better chance of playing guard than Schmeelk, but they both could play guard. So I don't know. That one's kind of, those guys are more fringe, where, JMS, John Michael Schmitz, is more like a strict center. So those would be the three guys, that I all have graded in, middle to late second, early third kind of range for me.
How close is Whippler to those guys for you?
Not very close. I have Stromberg fourth. I really like Ricky Stromberg as a fourth round grade. And then Whippler is like later fourth. I just worry about his size. He's small. Man, there's not a lot of small centers that are good in the NFL. It's just, it's tough. I've kind of, fallen victim to liking the small center before. So maybe a little bit of bias there against that, because he reminds me a lot of Garrett Bradbury coming out. Very athletic, moves very well, but short arms, small stature. Guys get into his frame pretty easily. He kind of gets caught up at the first level, especially outside zone, head up nose tackle, trying to rip through, get to the second level. I saw him get kind of caught up quite a bit, be late in those situations. Long arm linebackers can stack and shed him pretty easily. But I heard he's wired really well. He's a really good teammate, really good worker, and he's young. So I would definitely draft him for sure. I just, I struggle to see a real long-term high quality starter. I think that's in the range of outcomes, but I'd let somebody else do that if it's in the first 3 rounds personally.
Totally get it. All right, so let's now circle back to where we started. John Michael Schmitz, what sets him apart for you from the other guys as being your number one center on the board?
Consistency, really, experience. There's a lot of tape of him doing the same things over and over again. It's easy to feel good about his evaluation. The ceiling, I don't know that he has the physical tools to get to an all-pro or Pro Bowl level guy, whereas maybe Tippmann or Schmeelk, could maybe scratch that a little bit, down the line. But if you want a guy who's going to be solid right away and maybe just be solid and that's it, that's your guy. And I just feel better about that as opposed to betting on something, betting on a guy to kind of like develop, further than he needs to develop. I guess it just depends on the situation and who I was scouting for. If maybe I would value Tippmann above JMS, I think that's potentially, I think that's valid, but they're close, very close for me. But I just give the edge to JMS just because we've seen it for, multiple years now, several years, and it's very consistent. I love that he's come from a multiple run scheme. They're running power, duo, counter, outside zone, inside zone, pin pull. You've seen him execute every single thing you'd want to see. And another big thing about him is I think he's the stronger guy of these three in terms of play strength. And man, that really sets the floor to me for an offensive lineman. And if a guy plays strong, and I think he does, and he's also very skilled in the run game. He's on the ground a little bit too much. His body control isn't great. He reminds me a lot of Ben Jones, for the Titans, who's, 4th round guy, not a great athlete, but man, 10 years, solid starter because of so many other things that he does and understands. So yeah, that's why I give JMS a slight edge.
All right, Tippmann, he's 6'6", he's a little tall, at least for, as compared to a lot of centers. Did you see that show up in any way when you watched him? Is that not a concern for you? And what are the things that you really liked about Tippmann when you watched him at Wisconsin?
Yeah, it was a concern. That's a big reason why I don't have him above JMS. He reminds me, he's very, very similar to Josh Myers coming out. Very good athlete, burst, change of direction, very good. He's an outstanding puller. Wisconsin ran pin pull, I think 9-10 times a game, specifically for Joe Tippmann to get out in space and track down linebackers. So he has kind of that ace up his sleeve, where if you're a team that likes pin pull or wants to install more pin pull, you want a pulling center, Joe Tippmann's definitely your guy. He's very efficient just in the zone run game as well, combo blocks, getting up to the second level. Big frame, casts a wide net with his wingspan and his frame. He's quick. There's a lot of good things. He quarterbacks the line pre-snap as well. He's doing the mic points, like JMS as well. He's very active in terms of communication on film. But yeah, plays with an exposed open chest, persistent forward lean. Stout defenders can gain easy control over him, specifically on the first level, angle drive blocks, down blocks, base blocks, things like that. Hand placement isn't very good. He falls off blocks a lot. He's on the ground probably a little bit more than JMS is. He just, the first level is not a little, it's up and down. The second, third level, he's awesome. But if you can't take care of the first level, it doesn't really matter, about the second level too much, especially in the NFL. So there's some questions there, I think, but I think it's fair to say he has the best physical tools of any of these centers in terms of size, athletic ability. So there's a lot to like, but I think there's clearly some things that he needs to improve on. Like I said, if you read my Josh Myers scouting report coming out of Ohio State and you watch Josh Myers in Green Bay, that's very similar to what you're getting with Joe Tittman, I think. So yeah, that's how I see him.
Now, Cody Mock is somebody from a quote unquote smaller program, though it's an excellent program and they beat a lot of, 1A schools. He's someone that we haven't seen play center, right? We saw him play a little bit of center at the Senior Bowl in Mobile when we were down there, but he moves so well. He was a tackle in college. What is it about his traits that, to your point, you think, better center than guard even, that you think will translate into becoming a potential top end center?
Yeah, I mean, Malk is an easy guy to like for a variety of reasons. Obviously, kind of the way he looks, personality, all those kind of things. But when you watch the film, North Dakota State, they're a one back power team. That's kind of their bread and butter. A gap power is what you see from them 80% of the time when they run the ball. Which is nice because you get to see him execute a lot of gap concepts. So, he's very, I would call him a well-versed run blocker. He's skilled. Teams that want to run downhill concepts, I think, would like Cody Malk. I think his upper body strength is good. I think once he latches into guys, his grip strength, upper body strength, his ability to steer and seal defenders on down blocks, double teams, kickouts is good. Unrelenting finisher. Very good demeanor, tone setting kind of presence. And then he also has very good balance, as well, to kind of keep his feet, and he's good at the second level as well. He's definitely not going to play tackle, I don't think. The jump for him, I think, in terms of scheme is going to be more stark than the other two guys. North Dakota State's a run heavy scheme. And when they do pass, it's a lot of quick game stuff. He's just going to have a more of a process, I think, there to get used to pass protecting. Assuming he plays guard or center, 3 techniques, shades, it's just going to be a different world for him in that regard. I think he has the traits to, kind of, iron out those bumps over time. For sure. He has the right demeanor and stuff like that. He's high cut, lean, narrow, not the biggest, most stout guy, but he is strong. But yeah, I just think for him, the reason why I would kind of give those other two guys a slight edge is really what he's going to be asked to do compared to what he was asked to do in college. And then the level of competition is going to be dramatic difference. So that to me is just going to result, I think, in a little bit more of an adjustment phase for him. And then, of course, that's going to depend on where he goes and what he's asked to do as well. If he goes to a heavy play action scheme like you guys, where you're running play action more than any team in the league, or, one of the 2 or 3 most, that'll certainly help because he's going to be able to set aggressively on guys, in pass protection, not have to take a true pass set that often. Stuff like that, you could speed it up. But when I'm projecting for all 32 teams, I just think there's a good chance that he's going to have a pretty steep adjustment curve. So yeah, they were 70-30 run pass. I mean, and they're running all gap scheme. So it's going to be just different for him, but there's a lot to like.
What is it you really liked about Stromberg that has him that high for you?
Yeah, Stromberg, 4th, 5th round grade for me. Yeah, let me pull up his report. I mean, I think with Stromberg, it's fun. It's fun to watch him. When you first watch him, he kind of has a sloppy build, honestly. It doesn't really look that impressive.
Bigger guy though, which is nice.
What's that?
I said he's a little bit of a bigger frame than I think some of the other guys, right?
He's 6'3", 306. Yeah,
Just 306. So okay. You know what? On tape, he looked heavier than that to me.
Yeah, he may have played a little heavier. His build is just not that impressive. You see JMS at the combine, you see Tippmann and Malk, they look like, just they're well put together. I mean, he's rocked up. Stromberg just doesn't look like that. But when you watch him, I love his physicality. He's extremely quick and efficient into the first level of run blocks, or the first phase, excuse me. So we just talked about this on my podcast with Lance Zerline and Duke. There's 4 phases of a run block, and the first phase is really just getting into the block, how you fit into contact, the speed, and then the leverage that you play with initially. I think for him, it is very impressive how he gets into guys. And then from there, he's very instinctive and he's a very sticky run blocker. He knows how to utilize body positioning and manipulate leverage to his advantage to wall off, seal, and create alleys. He's very efficient working combination blocks. He certainly controls the operation pre-snap. He's active. He's making calls, corrections when needed. He's very efficient passing off line games and stunts. So I think his processing skills are very good. Competitive toughness is very good. He gets the most out of what he has. He also tested really well, which I think is just kind of a bonus. I don't think he necessarily plays to that, but he is, I think, more athletic than maybe given credit for. He has some lapses in balance and body control, especially at the second level. There's going to be things that he's going to have to overcome. I think his change in direction and reactionary quickness is adequate. So you see a lot of that manifest itself on the move. So those are some concerns there, but man, I've heard great things from people there, in the program at Arkansas, that he's just kind of a staple, a leader. He's a throwback guy, plays hurt, which is a huge thing for offensive line, 4-year starter. I compared him to David Andrews, who was undrafted. Nobody thought David Andrews would be anything. So he's not quite, undrafted material. He might go day 3, I think, but I could definitely see a guy winning very similarly to David Andrews. Very good in the first phase, very good at finishing, and, he's smart and tough. So, yeah, I'd love to bet on him in day 3, if I needed a center.
Much like you mentioned earlier in the podcast, Brandon, and just 1 or 2 more here, I've become more of an advocate for bigger centers after I watched Dexter Lawrence basically toss Garrett Bradbury around for 2 games at the end of the year. And I'm sitting there, I'm like, the Giants have to deal with Jordan Davis. They have to deal with Deron Payne. They have to deal with Jonathan Allen. And, then the Cowboys run all those stunts and twists. So I went back and I watched Steve Avila, and I liked his guard tape. Then I went back and watched his center tape in 2021. I got to be honest with you, I was pretty impressed by it. I thought it was good. Do you consider him as a potential center? And if you do, where would you kind of stack him with these other guys? Because just watching him, I love the position flex. He's played a lot in 4 different spots. I think he would be a really good, probably early second-day pick for somebody that could really be a weapon on that offensive line that you can use in a bunch of different spots, but primarily, of course, at guard and center.
Yep. Yeah, I'm with you. I have him higher rated than all these guys.
So do I.
Yeah, he's my number 1 guard. So yeah, I mean, Steve Avilas, almost 6'4", 335, has the size, the frame, the build that you want for a guard, who could play center. He's also played right tackle. And I think that really manifests itself in pass protection and the body control that he plays with. That's why I gave him the edge over Cyrus Torrence, because he plays with better body control. He's not as big and as long as Torrence, but he's just a little bit more efficient. Plus he still brings heavy hands. He delivers force and jolt at the point of attack. He can hold the point of attack. He can create displacement. And the great thing about TCU, even though they're air raid, That's a downhill power run scheme. They're running duo, inside zone, gap stuff. So you get to see him really impose his will on guys in the Big 12, which is awesome. He's stout in pass protection, great Senior Bowl as well. Yeah, I mean, and everything I've heard about him is very good as well. I think the Georgia game was incredible. The Michigan game against Maisie Smith was his best tape, I thought. So he plays up to competition as well when he sees real NFL level guys. The Georgia tape, they're losing by 60, and he's out there finishing dudes, burying dudes. It was just a very impressive tape. So I like what he was asked to do. I feel like you were able to see him execute everything you want to see a guard execute, and then he has tackle guard versatility in his back pocket, which most likely center versatility in the NFL. But the fact that he was able to play right tackle a couple games, get him out of a pinch, that's just a nice kind of ace, in the hole as well. So yeah, I mean, I compared him to a kind of an old school guy, Justin Blaylock. I don't know if anybody's gonna remember him, but he's a long time good starter for the Falcons, and very similar play style to Avila. So I like Avila. Maybe Larry Warford is another more recent guy that people can think of, to get an idea of Avila, former Saints Lions guard. So that's who I see, a solid starter. Probably won't ever get to a Pro Bowl, but man, he's gonna be solid for you.
Is there anything about his profile that would make you worried about making him your primary center as opposed to a guard?
Not really, no. I just think there's more value in having the guard, really. So that's where I'd want to try him first. But yeah, not really. I don't think. Yeah, I liked his guard tape a little bit more than center, honestly, myself. But there wasn't really anything that glaring to me that says that, yeah, he can't play center. So I think that's certainly possible for him.
All right, Brandon, I'll leave the floor open to you. With this offensive line class, you studied it up and down. Something that we haven't talked about yet that you think fans need to know about it as they head into the 2023 NFL draft.
I mean, that they need to know about the offensive line class.
Yeah. You can go any direction you want. Pick a player, the class in general, go wherever you want to go.
That's a good question. I would probably say I would just focus on, day 3 guys. There's some guys there. I would say there's at least 3 or 4 guys on day 3 that are probably going to start this year, which, looking at some of the research of the prior years is maybe average to above average, compared to how many guys typically come out of a class. And I even think in the undrafted pool, there's some potential guys that could at least compete for a job in this class. So while it's not as top heavy, and like, full of blue chip kind of guys at the top, I think that as you get later in this draft, there's certainly guys kind of scattered throughout that could at least compete for jobs and be quality backups with starting potential within their first contract. So yeah, I'm going to have a little bit more on that coming out here soon, but yeah, that's kind of one of my takeaways from putting all this together and grading almost 60 guys in this class. I think there's some of those guys, maybe more than given credit for.
I know you mentioned a couple names earlier. Who were some of those guys on day 3 that you think could kind of come in and start pretty soon?
I mean, with the potential to start, there's a guy named Anthony Bradford. I just talked about him in depth on my podcast with Duke and Lance, LSU guard, young, inexperienced, has a lot to clean up in pass protection, I think, before he could start. But 6'3", 335, in the linear plane, which, straight forward, straight backward, anchoring, delivering force, creating displacement. This dude is a monster. His tape against Jalen Carter, I think, speaks volumes. He's a guy I would love to get on day 3, because especially if you're a true multiple scheme and not like, one of the more zone oriented places, and you want to like go downhill on guys, run a lot of inside zone, power, counter, things like that. I think he has probably a pathway to start within the next couple of years. He would be one I would really like. I mentioned Nassim Richards. I think he's kind of a similar guy. I think Alex Forsythe has a shot as well, the Oregon center. He has some injury stuff, though. He might not even get drafted, but he's a good player. CD So from Eastern Michigan.
That's a good one.
Kind of a random name. But I really liked his run blocking as well. He, again, has a lot of work to do in pass protection, but he's big, strong, 6'5", 330, long arms, tested well, like Bradford. And he could win right now as a run blocker. It's just pass protection. He needs some work. So that's another one. I think Juice Scruggs from Penn State has a shot. He doesn't stick on blocks very well, but he's strong. Played a lot of football, guard, center, versatility. I see him as a backup, but that's another guy. Going down this list, there's a guy from Oregon that I wound up liking quite a bit. I gave him a 6th-round grade, but I could see him, in 3-4 years potentially being a quality backup who could play. His name's Salah Omave Lalu.
Well done.
He played right tackle for Oregon. Probably play guard at the next level, 6'6", 320, and he moves really well. He's featured in their run game. Fun to watch. Naturally, a really powerful guy. He's a potential guy. And I mean, I could go on. There's more. Like when you're talking 6th, 7th round, there's guys that just show 1 or 2 things on tape that you really like, that you're like, okay, I can at least work off of that.
You're hunting traits, right?
Oh, yeah, you're hunting traits and skill, I think as well, not just traits, but if a guy does one thing really well, and then he has some traits to back it up, yeah, that's what you're looking for. So there's several of those guys, man, late in the draft that they're probably only going to be backups, but man, everybody needs a quality backup on the offensive line. So these guys have value,
Damn right. Brandon, good stuff. Tell the folks where they can find all your great work.
Yeah, so trenchwarfare.substack.com is where I primarily do most of my stuff. And then if you want to read all my scouting reports, I think I have over 50 of them this year. And then the last 2 classes, every offensive lineman drafted, Bleacher Report. So yeah, those are the main spots.
Brandon, appreciate the time, my friend. Talk to you soon. Enjoy the draft. We're here.
All right, man. Thanks.
Brandon Thorn, Shaun O'Hara on this episode of the Giants Huddle Podcast. Thank you for joining us, everybody. It's all brought to you by PSEG. We'll see you next time.